And now to politics. The Democrats take over the House, and, well, they will be in charge of several things, including the House Financial Services Committee. Want to bring in Wisconsin Congressman, a member of the House Financial Services Committee, Congressman Sean Duffy. Congressman, so what are we going to see with respect, do you think, like more bank regulations?
Yeah, so I think they're going to try to have more bank regulations. Maxine Waters will be our new chairman, and I got to tell you, I get along really well with Maxine. She's a wonderful person. We just disagree on policy. But she's a believer that more regulation means a stronger economy, that there's more equality in the economy. And so, yeah, I think they're going to push hard to have more regulations, more regulators. And I think that's going to be bad.
You guys ever sit down and say, okay, let's look at the data, okay, and see, perhaps over the last couple of years, and it's only recently where some of these small banks have been relieved from some of the onerous, some of the onerous regulations that I guess were aimed at big banks, but seem to have crushed small banks, which means it crushes potentially small bank customers.
Well, and for small town America, it's a big deal because, you have all these small community banks and credit unions that serve small communities. Decisions are made, locally, but when you had a consolidation or those small banks went out of business, just because of regulation, now you have decisions made in a far-off, larger city, and, you lose that touch with the local community. So that's bad, and Democrats agree with that as well. It's trying to figure out, well, what's the cutoff? How big does a bank have to be before we give them reprieve from these regulations? But listen, I'm optimistic, though, because we still have the Senate. So to push new regulation, I think it's going to be hard for Democrats.
But the problem, though, is you didn't get a chance to completely unwind some of the onerous damage from the previous administration on the banking sector. And I think there was hopes that would happen and to help further unleash this economy.
We did in the House. We did a lot of work in the House. The problem was in the Senate, they needed a 60-vote threshold, so we weren't able to get that work done. I would just, so my hope is that Maxine can't do too much damage. But she goes always back to 2008. Look at, you guys had, deregulated the finance sector, and look what it brought us in 2008 and all the people that were hurt. And so we have to go back to stronger regulation. And Dodd-Frank didn't do enough. We got to go even further. And by the way, I think that's the holy gospel. You can't change anything in Dodd-Frank, and no law you pass is ever perfect.
Although Frank himself has admitted to mistakes in that bill. In retrospect,
they don't seem to hear that. They cover their ears and go, no. Stop it, Barney. Stop saying anything bad about this bill.
What about the social justice angle that she seems to be bringing to the job? The idea of correcting the wrongs of yesteryear, reinstating or reinforcing the Community Reinvestment Act and things like that. That, to me, appears to be one of her singular focuses. And, the argument, of course, from the banking side is if you force us to make loans to extremely high-risk borrowers, we're going to be in a more precarious situation.
So one, you have banks that are less strong, but two, you have people getting loans that can't pay them back. Both things are bad. And again, if you can't get a loan because of your sex or sexual preference or your race, that's a bad thing. We want to look at your credit score and your income and your ability to repay. I think they're stepping beyond those guidelines and saying we want to, again, see loans made to people based on who they are, again, the color of their skin, their race, or religion, their sexual preference, and that's a bad place for finance.
But we know that's where she wants to go.
She wants to go there, yeah. And again, as you mentioned, she's trying to right wrongs of the past.
Sure.
Instead of saying, listen, if we have a community that is qualified to get loans and they can't, well, that's a problem. We're all going to stand together and fight against that. Right. There's a systemic issue in that community, but we just don't want to have blanket rules that say you have to give preference to people because of...
And it has backfired. Another one for you, Congressman. Nancy Pelosi will likely now be Speaker of the House. So what does this mean for our money, for our economy?
Well, listen, she's a collectivist socialist, right? I mean, she's a San Francisco liberal. And so she believes that she can spend your money better than you can. So on Black Friday, as you see people going out to all these stores and buying things, Nancy's like, no, Charles, I can spend your money better than you can. And you know what? They're true believers.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked a couple days ago about Mayor de Blasio wishes he could, develop each plot of land in New York City.
And control it all.
Control it all. This is where they're at. And horrible for economies, horrible for individuals, and horrible for freedom. But, thank God we're going to keep pushing back as House Republicans. And again, we have Senate Republicans and a president who aren't going to go down this path with them. But they are truly going to lay out a vision that is a socialist vision for America. And I don't think it's good for anybody across the country. And I think there'll be a mass pushback.
I just hope that there can be some things done. I hope there's not all about investigations. I hope there's some legislation and there's some, there are a lot of things that could be compromised. We've got to run, but
healthcare potentially and infrastructure. Those two things can get done.
Thank you very much.
Charles.